Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you can be in the world. Welcome in, welcome back. My name is Brooke, aka Brooks Moon, and I hope you're doing okay. Today is going to be a very different style video from my last few ones. We are going to be doing a 12-hour reading vlog. I am very behind on reading right now. Making the Marauders video really did eat up like a shit ton of my time. I'm not even mad about it because I am incredibly in love with that video and I think it's like my best work so far. But thank you for all the love on that video. That's crazy that 28,000 people watched it. I am very much behind on my reading goals for this month. Didn't anticipate the fact that that video was going to take me at least a week to edit. Did though, because it's 2 hours long and I edit all of my own stuff. So it took some time. Fruits of my labor have been great. So it's totally okay. But I wanted to make sure that I was able to get some reading caught up, so that's why we're doing this vlog. This was supposed to be a 24-hour reading vlog, but I didn't do that because I forgot that Bridgerton was coming out on the 16th, and so that was yesterday. I was going to start the reading vlog yesterday, however, I then started watching Bridgerton instead and watched all 4 episodes of season 3, saving my thoughts for a later video, but oh my god, they did it once again. I'm obsessed. So we're going to be getting through as many books as possible today. The good thing about this is that a lot of these books that I am reading, I have started and just need to finish because I'm a mood reader and I read about 4 books at a time. So that's just the situation that we're at right now. This is the stack plus 2 books that are on my Kindle that I don't know if we're gonna get to both of them, but I'm optimistic. On my Kindle though are Bridgerton. I have not started the Viscount Who Loved Me yet, but I am trying to get to it today, at least starting it today. Finishing it today, maybe. We don't know. We'll see. Books 2 and 3 on here, which is Antony's story and Benedict's story, which I love Benedict Bridgerton so much, so I cannot wait to get to his book. We'll see if I can finish it because for whatever reason, when I'm reading on my Kindle, I read extremely fast and I got through The Duke and I pretty quickly. I have faith in myself to read through this book pretty fast, but this is not the first one that we're going to be reading today. I am currently 60% of the way through As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. I have been eating up this book. I am almost finished. I'm on the beginning of part 2 of this book, which there is so much happening. Plot armor for Pippa Fitzmoby is insane, but I love her so much, even though she just keeps traumatizing herself. The first goal of this reading vlog is to finish this book, and I have faith in myself because I'm 60% of the way through, so I think I have maybe more than 100 pages left. The second one on that is lljoy, which is a Holly Jackson novella following Pippa, so I just thought it'd be kind of cool to round out the Pippa reading experience. It's like a little bit more than 100 pages, so it's a pretty easy read for me and it counts, so you know. Next one I have is People We Meet on Vacation. I have started this one. I'm not very far into it, so I still have quite a bit to get through on this, so this is the third one we will be reading today. I also have The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. I have not started this. This is a hopeful we will get to it. This is kind of like what's next on my TBR for right now. There are certain books I want to get through today, and these are the 5. I'm gonna say 5 because I really doubt that I'm going to get to Benedict's story. We may get through Antony's. I don't know. We'll see. It's also raining today, which makes me incredibly sad because I wanted to go read outside, but that's not gonna happen. Living in the South is such a fun experience. You never really know what the weather's going to be. It's so great. It's so wonderful. Going to go make myself some food and some coffee, and we're gonna get through this book and we're gonna finish it. I'm gonna see how well I can do at vlogging because I'm always so bad at it. This is a learning experience for me. The only way I can explain that Robbie is going along with this is because he is so down bad in love with her. They are literally soulmates, because how are you going to go along with something like this and be fine with it? That's literally what my capstone project was about. My capstone film was literally about 2 lesbians who wake up in the middle of the night and kill a man and then they bury him in their backyard. Never mind, I'm gonna shut the fuck up. The sentence I just read. And this is why I love young adult books, because they can just be absolutely insane, and your protagonist has such thick plot armor that it doesn't matter. Also, I finished my breakfast and I have therapy in 20 minutes, so I think I'm going to relocate upstairs and continue reading until my happy moment. So I finished therapy and ended up wasting like an hour. I didn't have the timer going, it was paused, so I forgot to turn it back on. This is going to end now around 2 a.m. Using my brain. It's fine. What is happening? What is going on? So confused. And not to Silva, the woman that you are. I loved her character development so much. Like, her character development in this book series is probably one of my favorites. So we are, I don't know, math, 2.5 hours in. I'm on page 350 of this book, which is, according to Goodreads, 76% of the way through. So I don't have that much left. I am going to go get some snacks though with my sister. Don't know if I'm going to pause the timer. I might just keep it running because we shouldn't be out for that long. And then we're gonna resume. I really want to finish this book like within the next like hour or so. But the fact it's been like 2 hours and 15 minutes and I've only read like 100 pages is not good. So I keep getting distracted, but I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to come back and then put on my headphones and just like sensory deprivation and just read, because usually that works. I have thoughts on this book that I'm going to kind of limit because I want to talk about this book and the other 2 books in this trilogy in my recap video that I'm posting next month. This is an insane concept and plot, and the fact that like my suspension of disbelief has been suspended so much for this book to be realistic is crazy, but Holly Jackson somehow manages to do that. So we're gonna go get some snacks at the Asian market, and I'm gonna maybe get some food because I'm shaking because I'm so hungry and I've only had an omelet and a piece of toast and a lot of iced coffee today. Put some sustenance in my body so I stop shaking. I think I'll pause the timer for dinner. I'm not gonna pause it now though, just because I need it to run out a little bit. I got my snacks, a California roll and some sweet potato snack. So we're gonna grind out the rest of this book, hopefully before dinner. This is so much sushi. I do not think I'm gonna be able to eat all of this by myself. Bro. What? 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 Why? 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 What? Ravi Singh. Ravi Singh. Ravi Singh. Okay. Sure. I finished it. Okay. I'm gonna give my thoughts after I eat dinner. Book done. I feel insane. The levels of anxiety this book gave me in the last 60% of it is insane and should be a crime. Holly Jackson should be behind bars for making me stress the way that I was. But we are halfway through the timer and I've only read 1 book, so we'll see. I'm gonna pause the timer when I go and eat dinner. So I'm gonna go eat dinner with my family. I'm 1 book down. Pippa Fitzamobi. That's really all I have to say. I am back from dinner. The timer has been resumed, currently telling me that I will be finishing at 3:13 a.m. So that's fun. I guess that's just the price I have to pay. That I only read through 1 book and it took me 6 hours is kind of embarrassing. I'll talk about this more when I do my spring recap video, but the level of just like characterization that Pippa goes through alone, my brain could not really comprehend what was going on towards the end. I don't spoil anything, obviously, because I want you to read them and experience them yourself. Holly Jackson's a good writer. It's very YA coded. There's a lot of plot armor. More plot armor than I think has ever existed in a YA book ever kept happening. Just kept getting worse. Like Pippa just continuously traumatized herself. And I was anxious reading the ending of this book. 40% of this book sent me into a fucking spiral. But we were both losing our minds at the same time. Holly Jackson, you deserve to be behind bars for making me feel that stressed out over pieces of paper. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I thought the ending was sweet. I thought it wasn't like overly explained. I genuinely enjoyed the book. It was a 4-star read for me. But yeah, I'll have more thoughts, I think, in my recap video because I'm also so tired and I came down from like multiple anxiety adrenaline highs trying to read that. But I'm not done because I'm going to read lljoy next. It's a novella. I think I'm going to be able to read through this pretty quickly and it will make me feel better because then I've technically read 2 books and not 6 hours because I feel crazy. I feel like I went through what Pippa went through. That's how invested I was. Maybe it's just a comment on the fact that I have severe anxiety, but I was stressed out. Okay, we're going to start this now. I'm realizing that this is happening before the first book, so like, yikes. Fun, okay. Like a little less than 5 hours left and I'm like 50 pages into this novella and it's so cute. I'm not gonna lie. It's nice to see these characters not in the context of the trilogy, but like outside of it, I think it's fun. I like seeing Jamie's character. Change locations because I need to plug my laptop in and I have my friends on call to keep me company right now, so I'm going insane. It feels like kind of just a little bit, but this is really silly. Holly Jackson, even when like there's not murder happening or like actual death and crime and like terrible things, the suspense in these books is insane. She does an amazing job. My anxiety up. Jail. 67% of the way through, according to Goodreads. I finished it. Cute. I liked being able to see these characters from a different perspective. Nice to see them outside of like the trilogy plot points. Elliot Ward being in this one was really interesting, especially at the end. A little nod to like what connects in Pippa's head to do the case that she does in the first book, so that was cool. It was silly. It was a murder mystery party, so like it was really silly. I liked it. I thought it was good, so I gave it 4 stars. I think it was fun. 3.5 hours left on the timer, and I'm really tired, but never back down, never what? Never give up. So we are having a complete tonal shift, and I'm moving on to people we meet on vacation. We're completely abandoning the YA mystery thriller genre. It's done. I'm now going to try to finish this. According to Goodreads, I'm 32% of the way through this book. We'll see how far I can get. I think I'm just gonna read this one. I'm on page 116. How far I can get. I wonder if this one will make me cry, because Beach Read did. So we'll see. I just marked lljoy as done on my Goodreads and it turns out I'm halfway through my reading goal. Like, what? That's insane. Also, this is so slay and I needed to keep going up. I'm gonna like end up like beating my reading goal again, so I think I'm gonna end up upping it. Hopefully. I'm going to go wash my face and take out my contacts and like take all my makeup off so like I can feel clean because I'm getting sleepy and I have 3.5 hours left. So maybe I'll go make some tea and a snack and something to like get the body going, you know? I washed my face, I took out my contacts, I put like my medicine on my face for my acne. I am now going to go downstairs and make some tea. I really hope I'm able to pull through. And it never seems to disappoint. I really like this book. I like these characters so far, so I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be able to get a good chunk of this book done, more than 50% of the way through. That's my goal. I started this video off being like, I have 5 books along the line. Girl, I was very optimistic. I'm so tired right now. He's so tired. Okay. Have tea. I'm about to put vibes on my television. We're just gonna grind out. There's like 2 hours and 45 minutes left on the timer. I took a little bit more time than I wanted to make my tea. I'm now going to be like brainwashing myself into thinking I'm not actually tired. It's just like I'm telling my brain no. I'm not actually exhausted. That's not true. I'm not tired. I've never been tired in my life, okay? I just want to go to bed. I just want to go to bed and give up. I am not one to ever give up on a challenge, okay? Are officially at the 2-hour stretch. There's 2 hours left in the 12 hours. I'm so tired. I really don't know how people do this for 24 hours. And I'm really glad that I didn't do 24 hours to start, that I only did a 12-hour reading challenge first. All I want to do is sleep and go to bed because it's late and I have work tomorrow. I'm considering pausing the timer and like resuming this in the morning and just like getting up early and just finishing it. But I also know that like if I try to do that, I'm just gonna sleep through my alarm, so like it's not going to matter. I'll stretch it out and call it a day. But I've read 50 pages of this book and according to Goodreads, I'm 42% of the way through. Getting close to that 50% mark. Maybe we'll see. I have 2 hours left, so we'll see how much I can read in 2 hours. But the fact I've read 50 pages in a little bit more than an hour is saying a lot. But also I spent a good chunk of that time making tea, so there's also that. I watched Lexi's video, her 24-hour vlog yesterday, and I watched her descent into madness, and you know what? I get it. We're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through this next hour and 52 minutes, and it's gonna be great, and it's gonna be fine, and I'm gonna get even further in this book, and I'm gonna possibly finish it tomorrow, and all will be well. I'm trying to catch up. I don't know if it's working. Officially made it to the last hour. There's no longer triple digits on this fucking timer. Dude, I have not gotten much further into this book. I think I've only read 20 pages since the last time I checked in, but that's because I'm so tired. I can like feel myself slowing down reading. I get super like sucked into this book. It's just like what Emily Henry can do. Like, forgot I was reading for a second, and like I was there with them. I was not in my bed reading at 2 a.m. That wasn't what was happening. I have an hour left. I'm going to read as much as I can to get through this last hour. And hopefully it's more than 50%. It looks like it. I'm not really good with like looking at books at the spine and like trying to see how far I am. That's why I trust Goodreads Storygraph to tell me where I am in books. I was there and I can go to sleep, and I'm gonna check in tomorrow before I go to work just to see how I'm feeling. I'm so tired. But this was fun. I finished 2 books today, which is great. How I thought I was going to be able to get through 5 is insane, but we're gonna ignore that. I don't know if it's just because I'm tired or it's just because Emily Henry likes to make me cry. People just like write things And I just like, I have tears in my eyes. I love her books. I love her writing. I love her. I'm pretty far along. 7.5 minutes left. Tugging along, and we're a lot further than I thought I was going to be, so we're gonna go for the next 7 minutes, and it's gonna be fine. Well, I did the thing. It's been 12 hours of me reading. Update on where I am on People We Meet on Vacation. I'm 65% of the way through, which is further than I thought I was going to be. I said 50 was the goal to like, because I knew I wasn't going to finish this in the time that I had left. So much left is impressive. So I do think I'll be able to finish it tomorrow. 3:22 in the morning. I'm exhausted. I'm probably gonna brush my teeth and then immediately pass out in my bed. Just to read 2 books today. I finished one and I finished a whole nother novella, which is pretty impressive for me. Double the way through this book that I was at, because I started at 24, I'm now at 65, so that's more than double. I can't do math normally, and I can't do math when I'm exhausted. Back in tomorrow morning, just to see how I'm feeling. See how tired I really am. Really enjoying where this book is going. I can feel it being around a 4-star review for me, a 4-star read. Just because I love Emily Henry. This woman speaks to my soul in ways that I didn't even know were possible, or in ways that I didn't think other people knew existed. So go sleep now. I'm tired. I have a 9-hour shift tomorrow. Or today. It's tomorrow now. If I do this ever again, which I probably will, I'm gonna make sure to do it on a day where I'm not working the next day, because that was stupid of me. Good morning. It is the next day. I am really tired. I don't think I ended up falling asleep until like 3:30. It's currently 9:20, and I have to leave in 10 minutes to get to work. Regret is the main emotion that I'm feeling right now. I didn't hate this. I would do this again, I think, but just like on a different day where I don't have work the next day. I kind of want to do a 24-hour reading vlog, just because I think that would be fun. And I feel like I'd be able to read more than I did in this 12-hour reading vlog. I need to like really like commit to it and like be like, okay, the reading is the only thing that I'm doing, but like if allowing myself a few breaks every now and again so I don't go insane, you know? If you enjoyed this video, liked watching me descend into madness, you're welcome. Make sure to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed, obviously. All of that fun stuff. As always, my social media links are in the description down below. You can find me elsewhere if you choose to. Do something nice for yourself today, like going to bed on time, and remember you are loved, especially by me, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.